In this third video of Chapter 9, we will look at a number of theories of language development. They're listed here. We'll talk about behaviorism and social cognitive theory, nativism, interactionism, and cognitive processing theory. So let's begin with behaviorism and social cognitive theory. This is basically says that we learn language through two major processes. The first is that we learn language through operant conditioning, meaning that we are rewarded or punished after speaking, and our speech is shaped through these rewards and punishments. Now, when I talk about rewards and punishments, don't think about, conscious punishments or rewards. I mean, these are little indicators. Rewards and punishments take many forms. So let's say a baby babbles a little bit and says ba ba ba, and you as a parent says, oh my goodness, you're trying to talk, and you're all happy and you respond to them because they said ba ba ba. That is a reward. It's a reinforcement. It makes the baby more likely to produce sounds in the future. I mean, on the other hand, if they say ba 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 and you give no response, that's a form of it. It really is a form of punishment. So when babies are speaking, or when toddlers are speaking, depending on our responses to them, babies will be more or less likely to say certain words and certain vocalizations. Over time, you can imagine that we can help to shape the babies or toddlers to produce more accurate words. So perhaps a baby says wah wah when they want water, and at first that may be okay, and if you understand them, you would give them water every time they say wah wah. But let's say that baby grows up to be a 2.5-year-old and they're still saying wah wah. You may correct them and say, no, it's not wah wah, it's water. This would be a form of punishment. I know it doesn't sound like it, but just a correction is a form of punishment. They're not getting what they want. You're asking them to reproduce what they asked for and to get it more correct. So if you're not giving them water right away, you're punishing them because you're asking them to try again. And anyways, these are little rewards and punishments that we do as parents. And according to behaviorism, we help to shape our infants and toddlers and young children's language by rewarding and punishing them in this way. How we respond to them each time they say something or verbalize something acts as a reward or a punishment. And over time, they will learn to say words more correctly because we will reward them when they say something correctly by understanding them. If they say something incorrectly, we might not understand them. And that would be a form of punishment. This ties in with social cognitive theory, which is about, remember, social cognitive theory has to do with observational learning. So they say that we learn language by imitation. That, as we're growing up, we imitate our parents or older siblings or other people in the environment. And that through imitation, we will start to, as infants and toddlers, we will try to vocalize new words and vocalizations. So a couple of pieces of evidence that support these is that, as shown here, First of all, for behaviorism, the more that mothers respond to the baby's vocalizations, the sooner they develop language. So even when your baby is cooing or babbling, remember cooing is vowel sounds like ooh, ah, ah, ooh. If you respond to them, that's like that acts as a reinforcement, like I want you to keep talking. Or if they're babbling, ba 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 ba, like and you respond to them, you're encouraging them to keep vocalizing. And at times they may babble something that sounds like a word. A baby can easily say mama or dada, even though they don't really know what they're saying, but they're just babbling. And if we respond with great joy, we're reinforcing that vocalization. They're more likely to say the same thing in the future. So a baby says mama, and the mother goes crazy and says, oh, you're saying mama, that's fantastic. Then she's because of her happiness, she's reinforcing the baby. They're more likely to produce the same sound again. Social cognitive theory evidence, learning language by imitation. Mothers who vocalize more have children who vocalize earlier and more. So when babies hear more vocalization, they tend to speak earlier. And this is a good piece of evidence for imitation. If they're hearing you speak more, they're more likely to speak earlier. So this this tells us that they're listening and picking up on language, and that they are going to eventually imitate words that they've heard before. This is why babies often, one of their earliest words is their own name, because they hear it a lot. They hear their own name over and over again. So baby infants, one of their earliest words tends to be their own name. Anyway, so the way that behaviorism and social cognitive theory works is that we learn language through imitation, and then it's shaped through operant conditioning. We originally imitate words we've heard, and then if we get them wrong, they're corrected or punished in a sense. And if we get them right, they're rewarded. We say something that our parents understand, then they respond to it, which is a reward. So over time, you're more likely to say words that are more understandable, less likely to say words that don't make sense. And this was the theory put out by the behaviorists, that this was how we learn language. Okay. In response to the behaviorist theory, along came Noam Chomsky. He's a very famous linguist, and he actually wrote a paper in response to the behaviorism theory, and he talked about a language acquisition device, that we have some kind of hardwired grammatical structure somewhere in the brain that's activated by hearing language in the environment, and that this part of the brain is going to analyze whatever language it hears and make sense of it, and the child will then learn language through this analysis of the language acquisition device. He called it a universal grammar because this language acquisition device would respond to any language that it's exposed to. So even though my parents both speak English, if I was to be born and then adopted by Russian-speaking parents, my universal grammar language acquisition device would pick up on the Russian that I hear, and I would learn the rules of Russian, and I would learn the words and the vocabulary, and I would learn to speak Russian. So this idea of nativism is that we're born with something in our brains, we analyze the speech we hear, and we learn to talk through this analysis. And one piece of evidence that supports this and goes against the behaviorism theory is the idea of over-regularization. And this is a very normal phase for children, that at some point they start to apply the rules of language, and they invent words that they've never heard before. So a child might say something like, you ask them, "What did you do earlier today?" And they say, "I go outside to play." So they say, "I go outside to play." Now, most likely they haven't heard their parents say the word "goad," or they haven't heard older siblings say the word "goad." This child has invented the word "goad" based on the fact that they have been learning the syntax and grammar of the language. They have learned a rule that you add ed to words to put them in the past. And so they say something like, "I go outside to play." This is demonstrating that they've learned a certain grammatical rule of the language, and they've used a word that they've never heard before. Well, this goes right in the face of the behaviorism and social cognitive theory ideas that you imitate words and then you get corrected over time and it's shaped over time. The starting point there was that you would imitate words. When a child says "gold," or let's say a child says something like, "the cats eated the mouses." Well, obviously they haven't heard somebody else say "cats eated the mouses." They're inventing these words based on learning the rules of the language. So they use the word "eated" instead of the irregular verb "ate," and they use the word "mouses" instead of the irregular noun "mice." And it's a demonstration that they're not just imitating language, they are inventing language based on learning the rules of the language. And this supports the idea of the universal grammar. This is what Noam Chomsky suggested, that our brains are built to analyze and determine the grammar and the syntax of a language. Okay, so those examples are best explained by nativism, and they really go against the idea of behaviorism and social cognitive theory. Now, I do want to point out, as I say that these things happen. I'm going back now. We know that language is shaped by operant conditioning. It certainly happens. We correct and punish our children's language all the time with little, agreements, or if we don't understand them, it's a punishment. We also know that children imitate all the time. But what this was pointing out, this universal grammar, was that those processes proposed by the behaviorists and the social cognitive theorists are not enough to explain language. They do not explain over-regularization. They do not explain that children invent their own words. And this idea of a built-in mechanism in our brains helps to explain it a little bit better. So these two theories are kind of at odds with one another, the behaviorist versus nativism. And of course, whenever there's two theories that are at odds with each other, some theory comes up that kind of joins them together, or shows up that's in the middle of them. And this is the idea of interactionism. They say that biological readiness to learn language. So biological readiness means like this is speaking about the language acquisition device without actually naming it, that we have some kind of built-in biological readiness to learn language. And it interacts with language in the environment, which is what the behaviorists are saying, to allow language learning. So basically, interactionism combines both theories together, that we have something built into our brains to respond to language, and we respond to the environment and like how parents or others speak to a child. Language is created socially through interaction between adult and child. Evidence shows that, for instance, that adults will modify the way that they talk with young children until the child can understand and respond. So there's an interaction process. Like an adult will say something to a young child. If the young child doesn't understand it, the adult will say it in a different way. Like adult, so there's kind of a back and forth. The child indicates their level of understanding. The adult might rephrase what they're saying to the child. One process that's been shown in research to be used by adults is called recasting. So adults recast what children say into more advanced grammar. An example of this would be, suppose the child says to you, more cookies. You might say back to them, oh, do you want more cookies? So like they said more cookies. You don't say back more cookies. You say, you expand, you recast it into a more grammatical correct form. So they say more cookies. Little kid says more cookies, and you say, okay, oh, do you want more cookies? So maybe the next time the child wants cookies, they might now say want more cookies instead of just say more cookies. And now they include the word want because you use that back to them. Oh, do you want more cookies? They learn something new. Next time they say want more cookies. So what interactionism is saying is that over time, language is built. It initially starts with biological parts of the brain that interpret language, but then it's also dependent on the interaction that children receive from others, from adults or older siblings. Okay, including this idea of recasting. And if you think about recasting, we do it all the time with young children. They say something, we often say things right back to them where we kind of take what they said and we expand upon it. They say, give bottle, and you say, oh, do you want your bottle? And this is an example of a recast. It's very natural, and it's helping to teach them language. There's a fourth theory that we're going to talk about. This one's a little complicated in certain ways. It's called the cognitive processing theory, and it's based on statistical learning. So this is that language learning is a process of data crunching. Children take in and process the language they hear, much as a computer would. So basically, this theory is saying that we listen to everything that we're hearing as infants and young children, and we analyze it. Our brains are like computers that are analyzing all the speech we hear. And by the way, before you start to doubt this, our brains are fantastic computational devices. We analyze all sorts of things precisely, even though we're not consciously aware of them. Like if you look in front of you on your desk or a table or wherever you are, you know precisely how far away things are that you reach for. That's why you don't miss them. If I reach for my glass right now to take a drink, which I need, okay, that's good for the throat. I didn't miss the glass. I picked it up right away. Because you know what? My brain can analyze exactly how far I have to reach to pick up that glass or this pen in front of me. So our brains are fantastic computational devices. They analyze things like distances and time. Like you may say something like, oh, it happened 5 minutes ago. Your brain knows precisely how long ago it happened. Like like milliseconds probably. Anyways, but we're not always consciously aware of the analysis that goes on in our brain. So I'm just trying to convince you, our brains really can analyze things. And what this theory says is that our brains are constantly analyzing the speech we hear. So the learning relies on the computational ability of the human brain. We engage in what's called statistical learning. Infants differentiate words from the stream of speech, from the frequency with which syllables end up next to each other. Now, this is a little bit of a complicated idea. It's known as transitional probability. Transitional probability. This is the likelihood that certain sounds will follow each other in speech that they hear. So let's say you're learning language. You're an infant or toddler learning language. Let's say every time you hear the sound Ellie, like every now and then you hear the sound Ellie, okay? Now, most likely, you're going to hear following it Fent, Ellie Fent, or you may hear elevator. Possibly you may hear element. Anyways, but there aren't too many things you can hear after you hear the sound Ellie, elevator, elephant, element. I mean, there's only a few continuations. So that's known as a high transitional probability, okay, between syllables. When there's a high transitional probability, meaning that like two sounds often follow each other, that is suggestive that they're part of the same word. So here's the thing: infants are hearing speech, and how can they differentiate one word from another when we talk? The thing is, when we talk as adults, we do not pause in between words. There are no pauses in between my words right now in my speech. It is a constant speech stream. This is why when you hear a foreign language, it often sounds like they're talking fast. It's just like blah 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 blah. You can't differentiate the words because there's no gaps. We impose those in our mind once we know language. Anyway, so the babies or the toddlers hear in the speech stream, and every time and they hear Ellie, and right after it almost is always like Fant or Vader. That tells them, excuse me, that tells them that word, that those syllables go together, elephant, that it makes a word. Now think about what could follow the word elephant. This is called a low transitional probability because there are so many things that could follow. There could be a sentence that the elephant is, I don't know, or the elephant was, or the elephant went, or the elephant had, or the elephant never, or the elephant, I don't know, grew, or the elephant died, or the elephant lived, or had, excuse me. Anyways, after a word, there's a lot of possibilities. There tends to be a lot more possibilities. Like, at the end of a word as to what comes next, as opposed to within a word. Like my name is Kevin. If you hear the syllable Kev, there aren't too many continuations. There may be a couple of other names, but there aren't too many words. Like almost every time you hear Kev, you hear in. That is once again a high transitional probability that those go together, Kev and in, to make one word. Whereas what could follow my name, once again, like hundreds or thousands of possibilities. Kevin went, Kevin died, Kevin lived, Kevin ate, Kevin, I don't know, tobogganed, Kevin drank, Kevin ate. I'm just making stuff up. So this is the idea of transitional probability, that our brains are really good at analyzing speech. We remember like examples, and we analyze them, and we learn what words are because the syllables tend to go together a lot of times. And the more times you hear it, like, so for instance, a baby hearing their name over and over and over again, let's say it's, I don't know, Sylvia. I mean, they hear those syllables, Sylvia, 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 like all together over and over. Then they determine that that's one unit, that's a word. And this is the idea of the statistical learning, cognitive processing theory, is that it is this analysis that our brains do on language, in order for us to learn the words and think, and then even further to learn how the words like are grouped together in syntax and grammar, and eventually through this analysis of our brains, we learn how to speak. Okay, it's an interesting idea, and don't doubt for a minute that don't doubt that our brains are capable of this. Our brain, like I said earlier, our brains are amazing computational devices. They do so much analysis that you could never do consciously. I mean, our brains think a lot more statistically and mathematically and do a lot more analyzing um, in an unconscious form than we can do consciously. Okay, and this wraps up the theories of language development